Imagine a map from 1919. It shows the British Empire. At that time, it was the largest empire the world had seen. It covered about 1/4 of all the land on Earth. Many countries were part of this empire called colonies. Canada, Australia, India, and large parts of Africa were British colonies. Even parts of the United States were British before. 1919 was after the First World War ended. From this time, the British Empire started to get smaller. Over many years, Britain lost its colonies. A map from 2025 looks very different. Today, Britain controls only a few small islands. The huge empire is gone. How did this big change happen? Just over 100 years ago, Great Britain was very powerful. Its lands were all around the world. Because the empire was so big, people said the sun never sets on the British Empire. This meant it was always daytime somewhere in the empire. But today, Britain is not a top world power. It has lost its great influence. Why did Britain lose its power? How did it fall from being number one? This is the story of Great Britain's rise and fall. We will look at how Britain built its giant empire and became rich and strong. Then, we will explore why the empire ended. We will learn the reasons for Britain's decline in power over the last 100 years. The story of Britain's power starts long ago. Big changes began in Great Britain in the 1700s. This time is called the Industrial Revolution. People invented amazing new machines that changed how things were made. One early important invention was the spinning jenny. A British weaver named James Hargreaves invented it around 1764. This machine made thread from cotton or wool much faster. Before the spinning jenny, making thread was slow. A worker spun only one thread at a time with a simple tool. But the spinning jenny could spin many threads at once. One worker using a jenny could do the work of 8 or 10 spinners. Factory owners liked this new machine. They could produce more thread faster and cheaper. They needed fewer workers or they could make much more thread. This helped owners make more profit, but many workers were worried. They feared the machines would take their jobs, leaving them with no work. Some angry workers broke Hargreaves' machines. They wanted to stop the change. But the new machines were here to stay. They started big changes in how people worked and lived in Britain. 2. Making the empire strong. New machines needed power to work. A man named James Watt made the steam engine much better in 1776. This engine used hot water steam. The steam pushed parts inside the engine and made machines work very fast. It was much faster and stronger than people power. Soon, steam engines were used in many factories. They helped make more goods than ever before. To make steam, the engine needed fuel to heat the water. Britain did not have many trees for wood. Wood was needed to build ships for trade and to travel to colonies far away. But Britain had a very large amount of coal under the ground. People used coal to heat homes from the 15th century. Some coal was easy to find near the top of the ground, so getting it was simple at first. Coal became the main fuel for the new factories in Britain. It powered the steam engines. By the year 1850, Britain produced 67% of all the coal in the world. It sold coal to many countries across Europe and even to China. Why did these big changes with machines, the Industrial Revolution, start in Britain? Other countries had smart inventors and resources like coal too. A different steam engine was even made before James Watt's improved one. The main reason was Britain's colonies. Colonies are lands ruled by another country far away. Britain already controlled important colonies. These colonies provided materials that Britain could not produce itself. For example, the new factories needed a lot of cotton to make cloth. Cotton does not grow well in Britain because the weather is often cold and wet. But cotton grew very well in warmer places like the southern parts of America, which was a British colony then. Getting this cotton involved a system called the triangular trade. It connected three places: Britain, West Africa, and North America. British ships took cheap goods like cloth, guns, and alcohol to West Africa. There, local leaders traded these goods for African people who were captured in wars or taken from their homes. These people were forced onto ships and became slaves. The ships took the slaves across the ocean to North America. It was a terrible journey. In America, the slaves had to work very hard on big farms called plantations to grow cotton under the hot sun. Then ships carried the cheap cotton back to Britain. British factories used this cheap cotton with their new machines to make cloth quickly. This system gave Britain cheap raw materials like cotton. Britain also had the new technologies, like the steam engine and spinning machines. And it had its colonies as markets, places where it could sell the finished cloth and other goods. These things together, cheap materials from colonies, new machines, and markets to sell goods, helped Britain's economy grow very fast. This made the British Empire rich and very strong. 3. The biggest empire. By the end of the 1800s, Britain was the most powerful country in the world. It had built a very large empire with colonies everywhere. People said the sun never sets on the British Empire. This was because Britain owned land all around the world in nearly every time zone. When the sun went down in one part of the empire, it was coming up in another part. Canada, Australia, India, and large parts of Africa were under British rule. India was a very important colony for Britain, full of resources. But getting there was difficult and slow. Ships had to travel all the way around Africa. This long journey took about 6 months. Then in 1869, a big change happened. People finished building the Suez Canal in Egypt. This new waterway made the trip between Britain and India much shorter. Now, ships could get there in only 1 month. This was very helpful for British trade and control. British ships used the canal more than any other country. Soon, more than half the ships passing through were British. Britain liked the canal so much that a few years later, it sent soldiers to Egypt and took control of this important route. Around the same time, Britain and other European countries became more interested in Africa. Before the 1870s, it was hard for Europeans to travel deep into Africa. There were local people who fought against them, and there were dangerous sicknesses like malaria. But then, Europeans got better medicines and stronger weapons. They also saw that there were not many other places left in the world to make into colonies. So, European countries started to quickly take over large parts of Africa. This time is sometimes called the Scramble for Africa. Britain, France, and Germany wanted to get as much land as possible. Britain took control of South Africa. This was very lucky for Britain because, in 1870, people found huge amounts of diamonds and gold there. A lot of gold came from South Africa, almost 40% of all the gold ever found in the world. These discoveries brought many British people and investors to the area, hoping to get rich. But Britain did not get all of Africa. France and Germany also took large areas. And across the Atlantic Ocean, another country was becoming strong, the United States of America. The USA used to be a British colony, but it had fought a war to become free long ago. Now, the USA and Germany were building many new factories, and their economies were growing fast. They were beginning to challenge Britain's top position in the world. The time when Britain was the clear leader was starting to change. 4. Wars bring big problems. By the early 1900s, Britain's power started to face problems. While it was still a huge empire, other countries were growing faster. In 1870, Britain made 1/3 of all the world's factory goods, but by 1910, it was in third place. The United States and Germany were now making more. British factories were often older than the new ones in America and Germany. British companies did not want to spend money to make their factories modern. They preferred to make money from the old machines. Also, workers in Britain started to ask for better pay and conditions. They formed groups called trade unions. Sometimes these workers went on strike. This meant they stopped working. Strikes stopped trains and ships, and this hurt businesses. Factory owners often fought against the unions instead of making changes. These problems made Britain's industry weaker. Then the First World War started in 1914. Britain did not have to join the war at first. It was safe on its island. But Britain worried about Germany. If Germany won the war against France, it might become too strong and be a danger to Britain. So Britain decided to fight against Germany. The war was very bad for Britain. Wars cost a lot of money. Britain had to borrow huge amounts. Before the war, the country's debt was about £706 million. After the war, 5 years later, it was £7.5 billion, 10 times bigger. The war also cost many lives. Almost 900,000 British men died. That was 1 out of every 12 men who went to fight. These were the young men needed to work in factories and businesses. The war showed that Britain was not as strong as before. In 1921, after a long fight, most of Ireland left Britain and became a separate country. This was a sign that the empire was getting weaker. Other parts of the empire also started to ask for more freedom. Britain realized it could not control all its colonies by force anymore. It did not have the money or power. So, countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa became fully independent. But Britain tried hard to keep its most important colony, India. It allowed Indians to have some elections, but a British governor stayed in charge. Britain hoped this would keep India calm. Soon, another big problem appeared. Germany, led by Hitler, was building a large army again. It looked like another war was coming. Britain did not want another war. The last one had cost so much, but it had to prepare. It needed to spend more money on soldiers and weapons. Where did this money come from? Britain had to borrow it, mostly from the United States. The country that was once Britain's colony was now lending it money. The two world wars helped America become powerful, but they made Britain weaker. 5. Countries leave the empire. After the Second World War, the world changed. Britain was not as strong as before. Two new very powerful countries appeared, the United States and the Soviet Union. Britain's time as the top world power was ending. Its large empire started to get smaller. During the war, the United States helped Britain. The US wanted countries in the empire to be free. They signed an agreement called the Atlantic Charter in 1941. This agreement said that people should choose their own government. Britain did not want this for its colonies at first, but after the war, Britain needed money from the US. It could not argue much. The idea of freedom for colonies grew stronger. In 1947, another important agreement was signed. It was called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT. The US wanted this agreement. It made trade between countries easier by lowering taxes on goods. This was bad for Britain. Before, colonies had to buy many things from Britain. Now they could buy cheaper goods from America. British factories lost customers in the colonies. Britain started to lose economic control over its empire. The British money, the pound, also became weaker. Britain spent a lot of money during the two world wars. The pound was not worth as much as before. The US dollar became the most important money in the world. Countries started using the dollar more for trade. This was another sign that Britain was losing its top position. Many countries in the empire wanted independence. In the 1960s, many countries in Africa left the British Empire. Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya became independent nations. Britain tried to keep control. Sometimes it used soldiers, but keeping the colonies cost too much money. Also, the United States did not support Britain keeping its colonies by force. So one by one, African countries became free. The map of the British Empire changed very quickly during these years. A big event showed Britain's new, weaker position. This was the Suez Crisis in 1956. The Suez Canal was a very important waterway in Egypt. Britain and France controlled it. It helped ships travel quickly between Europe and Asia. But the leader of Egypt said the canal now belonged to Egypt. Britain and France were angry. They planned to use soldiers to take back control. But the United States told them to stop. The US was worried about the Soviet Union's influence in Egypt. The US threatened to stop selling oil to Britain and stop giving loans. Britain had to listen. It could not act like a great power anymore without US agreement. The Suez Crisis made it clear to the world that Britain was no longer a superpower. The empire was truly breaking apart. 6. Difficult years for Britain. After losing its colonies, Britain faced serious money problems. The country needed its old colonies for cheap materials and to sell British goods. Without them, the British economy became weaker. The Suez Crisis in 1956 also showed that Britain was less powerful in the world. The country had to find new ways to manage its money. Governments tried to save money. One way was to cut costs. For example, in 1971, the government stopped giving free milk to older school children. This saved money, about $19 million. This money was used to help fix old schools and buy new books. But many parents were angry about losing the free milk. Life became harder for many people. Workers were unhappy with low pay and rising prices. There were many big strikes in the 1970s. Coal miners went on strike often. Coal was very important because it was used to make electricity. When the miners stopped working, many power stations had to close. This caused problems across the country. Britain also had very high inflation. This means prices for food, clothes, and everything else went up very fast. One reason was the high price of oil from the Middle East because of problems there. Oil was needed for transport and factories, so higher oil prices made everything more expensive. Also, workers went on strike asking for more pay. When companies paid more, they often put their prices up too. In 1975, prices went up by 25% in 1 year. The government tried to control the situation. Because of the coal miners' strike, there was not enough electricity. So in 1974, the government said most people could only work 3 days a week. Electricity was only available at certain times. Televisions stopped working early in the evening. Shops sometimes had to use special lights. It was a very difficult time. The problems continued. Britain's economy was not growing. The country needed money. In 1975, Britain had to borrow over £2 billion from the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. This was unusual for a rich country. It showed how serious the economic problems were. These difficult years with strikes, high prices, and lack of electricity made people very unhappy. In the winter of 1979, there were huge strikes. Garbage collectors, drivers, and even people who bury the dead stopped working. It felt like the country was falling apart. People wanted change. Because of these problems, the government lost power in the 1979 election. A new leader, Margaret Thatcher, became Prime Minister. She promised new ideas to fix Britain's problems. 7. New ideas, new problems. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher became the new Prime Minister. She had different ideas for Britain. She believed the government was too involved in business and owned too many companies. Her plan was to reduce the government's control. One big change was selling large state companies to private owners. This is called privatization. Companies like British Telecom, which managed phones, and British Gas were sold. This brought money to the government. Some people thought this was good for business, making companies work better. Other people did not like selling these national companies. Thatcher's government also decided to close old industries that were not making enough money. This included many coal mines. Coal was becoming expensive to dig up from deep underground. In 1984, the government announced plans to close 20 mines. This meant about 20,000 miners would lose their jobs. Many miners were very angry. They went on strike for almost a whole year. It was a very difficult time. There were many arguments and sometimes fights between the striking miners and the police. While old industries like coal mining were closing, a different part of the economy started to grow quickly, especially in London. This was the financial sector, the world of banks, money, and investments. Thatcher's government made changes to the rules for the London Stock Exchange, where company shares are bought and sold. They started using computers for trading, like in New York and Tokyo. They also made it easier for foreign banks and companies to do business in London. Big banks from America, Japan, and Europe came to the city. London's location was good because its time zone allowed trading with Asia in the morning and America in the afternoon. These changes helped London become a major world financial center. The British economy started to grow again, and inflation, which was the problem of rising prices, went down. However, these new ideas also created new problems. The changes helped make some people, especially those working in finance in London, very rich. But many people in other parts of Britain became poorer. When mines and factories closed, thousands lost their jobs and found it hard to get new work. The difference between rich people and poor people in Britain grew much bigger during this time. Margaret Thatcher was a strong leader, but her policies divided the country. She left office in 1990. 8. Britain Now and Its Future. In 1997, Britain returned Hong Kong to China. For 100 years, Hong Kong was under British rule and became an important place for money and business. In the early 2000s, London also became a top world financial center like New York. Lots of money came into Britain, but this success did not last long. In 2008, a big financial crisis started. Banks had given too much money to people to buy houses. When house prices stopped going up, many people could not pay the money back. This crisis hit Britain very hard because its economy depended a lot on banks and finance. The government had to use taxpayers' money to save some big banks. After the crisis, Britain's economy grew more slowly than countries like the USA or Germany. Some people in Britain started to blame the European Union for the slow growth. They said Britain gave too much money to the EU, about £13 billion every year. They also worried about too many people coming from other EU countries to live and work in Britain. In 2016, the government asked the British people if they wanted to stay in the EU or leave. This vote was called Brexit. The country was divided. 52% voted to leave and 48% voted to stay. People in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and London mostly wanted to stay. People in other parts of England and Wales mostly wanted to leave. Britain officially left the EU at the end of 2020. Leaving the EU caused new problems. It became harder for British companies to sell things to Europe because of new rules and border checks. This hurt businesses, like fishermen whose fish went bad waiting at the border. Prices for food and heating went up for ordinary people, about 6% higher. Foreign companies invested less money in Britain. Then in 2022, the war between Russia and Ukraine made things worse. Prices for energy, like gas and electricity, went very high across Europe. This made inflation in Britain reach 11%, the highest in 20 years. Life became more expensive. Today, Britain is not as powerful as it was. Its economy is now smaller than India's, a country that was once its colony. London is still an important financial city, but it has lost some business after Brexit. Britain has less influence in the world compared to big countries like the USA and China. It even had to agree to give back the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean to Mauritius. Britain is now searching for its new place in the world. It left the European Union, and its old colonies are looking towards new partners. Can Britain find a new way to be important in the world, or is its time as a major power truly over?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.